All right, now we're going to want our program to do what we call looping, meaning it's going to go around and around, sort of in a circle, so that as the person moves things around, it keeps coming back, waiting for them to move the next thing. And we're going to do that with what's called a while loop. So down here at the bottom, you pull up a while loop and just select true. Now this says while true is true, which is always going to be the case, so this thing is just going to keep looping around and around, let our program continue to run. Now, for each of our billboards, we need to set up something so that when it gets dropped on top of the drop zone, it runs that procedure that makes it disappear. And we're going to do that with an if statement. So pull up an if statement, put it inside the while loop. Just select true. Now, the way we're going to decide whether or not that happens is if these two objects, the billboard and the drop zone, do what's called collide, meaning they overlap each other. So I'm going to select the drop zone, that disk, and then in the tabs down here, I want to pick functions. And one of the functions is colliding with. And this has a true and false value. If two things are colliding, it turns to be true. So I'm going to replace the true in my if statement with that, and then select object 1. So if this drop zone is colliding with object 1, then this thing is going to be true and it'll do what's here. So then I want to go to my this section and select its procedures, and there's the one for object 1 to vanish. So I pull it up, put it in there. So now if the two objects collide, it will do this. So if I run my program, pull the 1 down onto this, it spins and drops out. Now I want to continue to do this for my other 5 objects, but rather than go through this whole process over and over again, what we can do is just copy this if statement inside the while loop and then just change these values to match which object I want it to work for. So I'm going to do an option drag and drag this down, and now I have 2, and then 3, and then 4, and 5, and finally a 6th one. So now I have 6 of those statements. I just have to change these things to match. So I'm going to first go through these and pull this down and make this next one for object 2. This one pull down, make it for object 3. This one for object 4. This one for object 5. This one for object 6. And then I need to change these procedure statements to be for the object it's supposed to be for. Now if you right click one of these, you get a little menu. You can just delete it and then drag over the one that's supposed to be there. So that's the one for object 6. Delete that. Drag the one over for object 5. Delete that. Drag the one over for object 4. And delete this one. Object 3. Delete this one. Object 2. So now I have all those set up, and if I run my program now, that vanishes, that one vanishes, that one vanishes, that one, and finally that one. So now I have those all set up so that the objects will vanish. Now later on, we're not going to want them all to vanish. We may have, for instance, we could be asking them to find things that are green, and say objects 1, 3, 5, and 6 are green, so objects 2 and 4 we won't want to go off the screen. And that's easy to do because I can come down onto this if statement, right click it, and there's a little thing that says is enabled. If I uncheck that, then this if statement is now not active. So if I run my program and I put number 2 on there, nothing happens. So that object stays, telling the user that that wasn't something they should have picked. Right, now one thing you have to be careful with here with these collide statements is that the two objects actually have to overlap, and they have to overlap in the program and not just from the way it looks in the from the camera view. So I'm going to go to Setup Scene here, and for example, I'll click on the drop zone and notice that its Y value, that's its up and down value, is at 0.2 meters. And if I click on the number 1 object, I see that its Y value is 0. So when I slide it on top of the drop zone, it'll overlap because it's lower than the drop zone. However, if I were to, when I move these around and do the setup, if I had raised that to say 0.3 meters, then it would be above the Y value of the drop zone, and they wouldn't actually collide. So if when you go to run your program, if you have an object that goes onto the drop zone but doesn't disappear, then you might want to double check that.